have any kind of comments for the Q&A section, please keep in mind that we do have the chat function enabled, so you can enter anything you want in the chat to ask questions as we go along, and we have moderators standing by to help get those questions to our presenters. So before we really kick things off, I do want to open it up to our very special guest here. We have the Dean of the Faculty of Applied Health Sciences, Dr. Peter Titus, with an opening statement. So I'm going to hand it on over to him now.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for welcoming me here to this first, I guess, of an annual anatomy event that you're going to continue. I'd like to start off, I guess, with the land acknowledgement and then provide a few remarks as we go along. You'll notice I'm wearing my Dean clothes today. I've got my Brock shirt on and a nice bow tie, so I don't get a chance to do that very often these days, but I thought for this occasion I'll dress up. So thank you for welcoming me. So I acknowledge the land on which Brock University was built is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging this is a reminder that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. So I guess I'd like to sort of start off my talk with a little bit of an overview of the anatomy courses within applied health sciences and the importance that we place on these courses, particularly for our kinesiology students and our health sciences students. I'm proud to say that the anatomy courses that we offer here, I think, are the best undergraduate anatomy courses in the country. I think the resources that we have been able to gather for this and the quality of the instructors, the quality of the TAs, and the quality of the students taking these courses are such that we take second place to nobody. The anatomy courses are really important building blocks for the education for particularly the health science students and the kinesiology students who are looking to go on to be health professionals. And the resources that they have, particularly in the sort of non-pandemic times, really are unique in that we have great access to the McMaster University Medical School cadaver labs. We've been blessed with student help in buying some of the equipment a few years ago, including the anatomage tables. We have a great set of various ranges of anatomy models. And we also have now developed wonderful online resources for our students as well. So the anatomy courses here really, I think, set the standard for the programs and set the standard for our students in terms of how they build the education and that they get here and continue to refer back to the anatomy courses that they took early on. Graduate students also take anatomy courses and anatomy-related courses as well, particularly the new Masters of Professional Kinesiology program, but in others as well. And I think the resources that we have for everybody here are really, really well used. So it's sort of unfortunate that in the pandemic times that we have here, the students that are taking these courses don't have full access to all of our on-campus resources for anatomy. And in some cases, that makes the learning of anatomy a little bit more difficult to do. Nevertheless, the resources that we've pulled together now and the work that has been done by the instructors and the TAs here to put the anatomy courses online and the scope of the resources that are available really do make up for a lot of what you're missing in the actual hands-on component. And I really commend the people that have worked hard to put this together, and I think all of you have really benefited from the effort and the time and the money that has gone into putting the resources together that you currently have in the online versions of these courses. And they will continue to be available even when we move into some sort of normalcy sometime in the not too distant future, and will continue to be resources for students going forward. So I think all of this is really to the benefit of the university, the programs that we have here, and all of the other students that are taking these courses. And in particular, I'd also like to say a few words about the difficult times that our students in particular, and to some extent our faculty and staff, have been facing with the online environment. It's not nearly the same as being on campus and having face-to-face, hands-on ability to learn. And the resilience and the strength that the students have shown this year, I think, really speaks well to the quality of the students that we have, and their perseverance and their I guess intelligence in terms of how they are able to cope with this environment and still come up with the understanding that the educational opportunities provided for them. And I'm confident that the learning that you've done and will continue to do in the anatomy courses that you're taking going forward will serve you well, and as well as they would have served you had you been able to have the actual face-to-face and hands-on experiences that we hope to be able to return to very soon. So I think there still will be opportunities for you to be able to visit the anatomy labs and to have interactions there and to continue to consolidate your anatomy knowledge once we return to on-campus teaching. And I hope that those opportunities will still continue to become available to you as we go forward. The other resources that we've been able to put together in terms of the online learning components beyond just the anatomy labs, the teaching and the instruction that have gone on with that as well, I think are really, really important components that you have also been able to make, I guess, full use of. And again, I thank the instructors, the TAs, the staff, and also the student volunteers in all the work that they've been doing in helping make this a meaningful experience for you going forward. I'd also like to reflect a little bit on the scope of what you've learned here relative to what I did as an undergraduate student in the dark old days of the mid-1970s. When I was a student your age back then, we were in physical education programs. Kinesiology had barely been invented at that time, and most programs were still called physical education. And I remember my anatomy classes and anatomy labs, which were not nearly as rich in terms of resources that you have now. We had rhesus monkeys to dissect. I and my partner would go to the lab once a week and dig out the garbage bag and the formaldehyde lined bag that the monkey was in, and haul it out and try not to choke on the fumes while we then tried to dissect whatever part of the anatomy we were trying to look at. So rhesus monkeys, while having some relationship to human anatomy, are not nearly the same as the real thing. And my anatomy education, I think, as such, suffered to some extent because of that. Nevertheless, I did learn enough anatomy to get through the course and to progress through the rest of my degree, but the amount of real deep understanding of anatomy and the amount of really close hands-on experience that you're getting with the models that are available now and the electronic versions of the various programs that you have now really give you a much, much better understanding of the 3D human anatomy form than what I and my peers would have had 50 some years ago. And I think that taking advantage of this is really, really important for you. So Thank you. So I think I'll conclude my remarks here by saying that I wish you a great day in the programs that you're going to go through this morning and to this afternoon. And I think the work that has gone into putting this together for you has been really, really helpful. And the enthusiasm of the course instructors here, the faculty and the staff is really second to none. And this, I think, really speaks well to the program quality that we have here at Brock and the ability of our instructors and staff to deliver you the best learning environment possible. So thank you very, very much, and enjoy the rest of your morning and afternoon.
Thank you, Dean Titus. To get things sort of started and going here, we do have, a couple of things that we want to go through this morning, and we should have access for our moderators to chip in. So hopefully everyone can see the screen. We're just using this as a way to highlight our structure and highlight what we're doing. So here we go with part one. The way we have this set up is, thank you for the opening remarks, Dr. Titus, once again. And we'll kind of move on to just talk a little bit about the highlights and some of the volunteer experiences. So I'm going to stop talking for the time being. Most of you are probably sick of me by now anyway. So there's that. I think, was it Alex and Vinita? Are you guys going to essentially take over so I can stop talking now?
Yes, we will be.
Okay, cool.
Wonderful. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to introduce the Brock Anatomy team. And so, Dr. Dragon, could you, sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to introduce and start off here introducing the Brock Anatomy team, and this is composed of Drs. Bodette, Dr. Dragon, Dr. McPherson, and Dr. Mazill. So Dr. McPherson is the assistant professor for systems anatomy in the Department of Health Sciences. Dr. Dragon as the senior anatomy lab demonstrator of the Department of Health Sciences. And for musculoskeletal anatomy, we have Dr. Bodette as the assistant professor from the Department of Kinesiology, and Dr. Mazill as the senior anatomy lab demonstrator of the Department of Kinesiology. And they're just going to talk about the highlights of the past year of anatomy. And we will, and any questions that you guys have, just make sure to put into the chat, and then Vanita and I will pose these questions in the Q&A period that will be coming up.
Just wait for the slides to come up here. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna start out with just the highlights of the past year, since it was a very different year, and I think we've learned a lot and we've grown a lot. So yeah, first, thanks for the introduction. Thank you guys for all joining us on our Saturday morning. We have a few slides that we're gonna share with you. And I think, yeah, Dr. Dragon has control of the slides, so I'll just let you know what's going on. So we've had a lot of time to reflect on the past year. And I guess I'll start with our immediate response to learning that we were going to be teaching online. So for me, that was a bit of a panic mode. I didn't really know what to do. And I'm sure that everyone was kind of thinking the same way. So traditionally, as you guys know, and you saw in those pictures, anatomy is taught in a big lecture hall. We have group-based learning. We have a lot of hands-on learning. And so we really had to try to come together to figure out how we can bring this together in a way that makes sense online, and that kind of brings all of those aspects of learning anatomy into the online world. So that was kind of our immediate response going through. Martin. So we came up with a few different ideas, for how to replace those experiences. And it really meant that we had to be innovative. And just realizing that those 2-hour live lectures probably aren't going to work online, and that we had to figure out ways that students could look at and experience anatomical structures in a virtual world. And so first thing we did was try to get feedback from students, because it's you guys that are learning online. It's really important that you guys take control of your education and give us the feedback for what you like and the different ways that you like to learn. And so we figured we would shorten our traditional lecture style and figure out how to do these videos so that you guys aren't, I guess, too bored hanging out watching videos online, and try to make them interactive. And so to do that, we try to use as many visuals as possible. You guys saw us all, recording ourselves over our slides, using a lot of different images, different models or demonstrations throughout, or even some visits with our dogs or other family members in the videos. And the other thing that we had to learn was a whole bunch of new digital resources. So again, trying to figure out how can we bring that hands-on lab component to an online learning scenario. And so we had a lot of discussions trying to figure out what can we use, and that's how we came across Visible Body, and trying to use that as a way for you guys to be able to manipulate some structures and some models, and to have those visuals of some cadaveric specimens to learn from. The other thing that I personally learned a lot about, thanks to Martin, was Sakai. Sakai, traditionally, I just, loaded my lecture slides up there and had a bit of information. And it probably wasn't as user-friendly as it could have been. So this past year, in making those week-by-week lessons and just having everything there for you guys, and having the checklists there and the videos, the quizzes, all the links organized for you, that was huge. And I think that's something that we'll continue to use going forward, because everyone seems to like how that's organized. And then the last thing that we really wanted to try to create and continue to improve on is that sense of community, because anatomy is such a community between the students learning together in groups and discussions with volunteers and TAs, as well as with the instructors. It's really important to keep fostering that community and continue to do that. So we tried to do that in this online setting as well, trying to be innovative. So I'll pass on to Dr. Bodette now.
Okay, so that's an awesome summary, Rebecca. I think really the aim that we're trying to take with this is to provide a little bit of insight to you all about kind of what went on in the back end. It was a pretty crazy transition in the winter term, and I don't even know how to describe it. I was very apprehensive. I had never taught online before, so it was kind of very fast-paced learning, trying to climb that learning curve. And realistically, we all did band together to address some of those items and topics that Rebecca presented on the last couple of slides. But here's a little bit more detail from my perspective, again, as that talking asynchronous head that some of you might be used to. So how did we go about doing this? So really, we had an opportunity to learn a lot. There's a spring offering of Kin 1 P98 that's taught by Dr. Shamera, and she started to implement some of these things over the summer term, and we kind of picked her brain and banded together as a group to figure out the best way to transition our traditional in-person learning approaches online. So I have a few kind of items on this slide to walk through. I don't know if I can really gesture, but anyways, you can see on the top left, we developed a team. Martin developed a team and then showed us how to develop channels. And we went pretty crazy in developing different initiatives and channels to try and support you all throughout the term. And we had regular meetings weekly to talk about how we're going to pivot our lectures, how we're going to pivot the lab, changes to the lab manual, research initiatives, just a whole bunch of things. So really, we did band together to try and make this work as good as possible. So after we started to get together and think about how we wanted to address this, we kind of went off on our own merry ways and started to record content, which was a very interesting experience, I think, for us. Like Becca mentioned, initially we started recording our traditional lectures, which are 2 hours long, which I don't think was the best approach. So I kind of put this silly little graph up in the middle of the slide to show kind of how I interpreted online recording and how my willingness to re-record our lectures kind of dropped dramatically as we went further on into the lecture. And I think we kind of refined our approach incrementally and started to record some shorter topic-based videos for you all that again, we thought were easier to digest and hopefully a little bit more bite-sized, I guess, so that you could get into them on the car, on the bus, wherever you might be. Although when we were recording these, I think Becca and I can both attest to this as well. We had lots of random interruptions. So I have my dog Nala, which I'm sure some of you have probably heard or met in some form or fashion at this point. Rebecca's dog Henry is posted on the slide there now beside his anatomy textbook, studying it as he should. And then me on the bottom left-hand side of this slide, I had a new son join the world in August, and he has recently become quite the squeaker and screamer. So again, I think some of you have had the opportunity to meet him. I apologize if he was a little bit annoying, but it certainly made things interesting. So we definitely had to reorganize, revamp, and in some cases, many cases, re-record. And then once we got all that content recorded, we needed to edit it. So this is something that I personally didn't have. I had zero experience with this going into it. So we relied on Martin and Yasmin to really help us with the video editing aspect and pulling everything together to make it hopefully an organized experience for everybody in the courses. But like Rebecca said, I just wanted to emphasize some of the biggest hurdles or initiatives that we try to recreate in our online experience. The biggest one for us, again, being that anatomy is traditionally an in-lab, peer-based learning course, is to try and facilitate dialogue. Email is great, but we as faculty get a lot of emails and it's hard to stay on top of all of the individual questions that you might have. Announcements are great, but it's just us speaking to you. There's no facilitated dialogue from the Sakai announcements. And we know that US students are inundated with a million announcements from your other courses as well. So we were, again, really trying to figure out some creative ways to facilitate a conversation with you all in the class, because at least in the lecture, normally you would all have questions and we can answer them on the spot. And there really is a back and forth that's quite helpful for everybody. So we put together some interactive lecture questions, which for those of you in MSK, you've seen them. I like to run them almost as like a game show host. But you can see an example of one of them in the top right-hand side of the slide. And I know Rebecca has these as well, and we really hope that they were helpful in your learning of anatomy the past year. We also in anatomy and MSK put together a discussion board, hoping that you can again learn from the questions of your student colleagues. Because again, that's a really great way to learn. If somebody has a question, it's likely that the answer to that question will help you as well. And then the last hurdle that we had that maybe we didn't think of, but was certainly time consuming, was the development of our Sakai exams. And I know you guys, if you're a student, you all see the front end, which is taking the exam. And I know that's a different experience for you all. But generating those things, oh my goodness, making those question banks with hundreds and hundreds of questions, that was a huge initiative as well for us as the anatomy team. But anyway, so I guess hopefully that summarizes some of the hurdles and thoughts that we had as lecturers, I guess, for Rebecca and I. What I'll do now is I'll hand things over to Martin and Yasmin so they can summarize some of the reflections for the lab as well.
Cool. Well, I guess we'll be introduced by Alex once again, if he can unmute it.
Yes, for sure. So Dr. Dragons and Dr. Zil, they are the senior lab demonstrators for systems anatomy and the musculoskeletal anatomy as well. And the moderator, again, if you have any questions, the moderators will be standing by. Just post them in the chat and we can ask them in the Q&A period coming up.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for that introduction. And thank you, Drs. Baudet and McPherson, for going over the hurdles of the lecture experience. So I guess we'll talk a little bit about, how the lab side of things went. And as you can see, these are basically two images that were at the forefront of our mind when this whole pandemic happened. So on the left, we have an image of the interactive experience in the lab. It's hands-on. It allows students to explore, to discuss, to ask questions. And then all of a sudden, bam, we are now having our students work and trying to maintain a similar interactive environment, all from the screen. So the biggest questions in our minds was, how are you going to make something that is so tactile and hands-on just as rewarding and as educational from a screen side of things? So that basically forced us to think about different components of the program and our steps moving forward.
And I think the big thing here was like the idea of critical thinking, getting people to work together, which is a huge learning component of anatomy. So this idea that, in a group setting, you can sort of work together and be able to do that. How do you translate that from like your couch or wherever you're sitting at home? Hopefully not in the bathroom. But these kinds of ideas, they're hard to try and kind of coalesce and get together and be like, how do we shift that so that all of those hands-on experiences can be translated to home? And it's not like we can print out 3D models and send them to everyone. That's just insane. But the thought did cross my mind, if I'm honest. So a lot of that was just, how are we going to make this work? And well, let's talk a little bit about, what we thought we might do.
Yeah, exactly. So what we ended up doing is we went, to our blank board and we thought about the different components that we typically have in the anatomy lab and how we can work around those components to make sure that we are able to share a similar experience in the virtual aspect. So for example, back in person, we have the models that the students are able to work with in the Walker complex. And we also have access to working with cadavers through the McMaster Medical School at the Cairns complex. So we wanted to find a way to allow students to be able to explore these anatomical structures. And this encouraged us to turn to 3D virtual softwares. So for those of you who are the students taking these two courses, many of you are now familiar with Visible Body. So that was the main program that we utilized while we had our labs. We also had the supplementary resource by Pearson. So it was the PAL resource that provided you with a huge database of anatomical images of whether it be models or structures. Now, while these images might not necessarily be hands-on, the nice thing about them is that they allowed you to explore, they allowed you to at least interact, whether it be with the images or the 3D structures. And so we've thought that that would go nicely with the way the virtual environment is set up now. And the other component we wanted to find a way to replace was the activities that we had in the lab. So as Dr. Dragon was saying, part of the anatomy lab is being able to have students engage in discussion, critically think, and ask questions, whether it be to one another or their instructors. And typically we used to have activities on the bench for students to go over as they go through the models. Well, what we ended up doing is we took those activities and we just created one large virtual lab manual. So again, many of you are probably familiar with this too. This is a lab manual that consisted of a series of pre-lab, in-lab, and post-lab activities. And one thing we really tried to focus on was having this multiple means of representation. So making sure that we have different types of activities that will accommodate to all kinds of learners, whether it be tables, diagrams, short answers. There was also the introduction of offline activities by our wonderful team of volunteers that gave you those tactile activities that you can do at home. And to top that off, we also wanted to make sure that as students went through using these resources, they still were able to have access to that guidance, so the lab demonstrations. And many of you are probably familiar with this by now as well, but we have a series of pre-lab videos that Dr. Dragon and I started putting together just to give you an idea of what to expect for the lab. So what are the things that we want to know for the lab? What are the types of outcomes we want to make sure that we take away from the lab. So those are definitely also a big learning curve. I have to admit, at the beginning, watching myself on the screen was very, very cringy, but I'm slowly starting to get over it. I don't know about you, Martin, if you want to elaborate on that.
Oh, it's trying to put a video together. I don't know if you guys, I mean, not like you guys are putting together anatomy videos, but to make something like that's 10 minutes long could take anywhere from like an hour to 2 hours. It's kind of insane. And that's just the recording and mess ups that you do. So a lot of this is not just learning, okay, how do we present in front of a camera, but then the skills to try and edit something together that's cohesive, get the audio together, get like silly little effects just in there to kind of help visualize certain things. There's a lot that we put into it to really make this as accessible as we could for students. And I just want to say that, considering all of this, thank goodness for TAs, good TAs, and excellent volunteers. So I do want to highlight something else that's popped up, kind of non sequitur, but I've been told, and I'm being messaged because I'm running the show behind the scenes as well. Some of you aren't able to actually type into the chat who are attendees. So what we're going to do for the Q&As, I'm going to make this up as I go on the fly. Sorry, Alex and Vanita. What you guys are able to do, you should be able to raise your hands. So if you have questions at the end, we're going to do a little Q&A after this. If you just use the raise hand feature on here, it'll pop up. It'll let us know. And then you are able to unmute. I've made it so that hopefully you can unmute and actually ask your questions out loud. And that should give everyone a chance. So hopefully Alex and Vanita can help moderate that as well. But if you raise your hand, Alex can then say, yep, I see this person, go ahead, and we'll go from there. So as far as like having good TAs and volunteers, we also wanted to do this idea of like breakout rooms. The fact that we can work in smaller groups, because that is pretty important for that sense of community that we wanted to build. Try to keep people connected, but also the smaller groups where you can just have a few people working together. For the most part, a lot of people enjoy that. So it was something that worked well in person. We tried to incorporate that in an online environment, and a lot of people kind of liked that. So it worked out pretty nice. It worked out pretty well. But it is a pretty big challenge to try and explore something like anatomy from a very in-person tactile kind of experience to something that's online with a keyboard and you're looking at images on a screen for like several hours a day. So we understand it's frustrating, but we're trying to really keep that connection as best we can moving into that sort of online realm.
Exactly. I think the best way I can see this is, if the analogy of an orchestra, you can have all these instruments, but if you don't have people that are conductors or someone that's orchestrating, we don't really get to have the advantage of those instruments. And that's how I see the TAs and the volunteers in this instance. Sure, we have all the resources, but that is only one side of the equation. The guidance that our teaching assistants and volunteers have been able to deliver throughout the process has been instrumental by all means. I know whether it be providing students with peer related experiences during the lab or posing questions to them. Many volunteers actually had ideas of their own, such as setting up drop-in sessions in preparation for exams. And with the TAs, walking the students through all those different tools and how to use them was also a huge factor in student success, because a lot of these tools at the beginning can be very intimidating. And of course, our computers, well, I think at this point they need a vacation of all the tools and resources that we're using at a regular basis. So there was a lot of troubleshooting in the process. And thankfully, because we're very, very fortunate and blessed to have a team of enthusiastic volunteers and TAs who also were able to take this transition very smoothly into this challenge to be able to help students and be there at the front lines for them.
Sean is saying some great lab group names, so that goes a long way too. I think that kind of summarizes the experiences of the past year, how things have hit. So, Alex and Vanita, I know you guys are going to help me out here. We can do the raise hand feature. Do you guys have questions for us about why we did certain things? So we can totally open the floor here. And if you have questions about, how we may have done things or what we've learned, I know Sean and Becca have thrown me under the bus and saying, oh, because of Martin, we now know Psychi and other things. So don't all jump at once, but do feel free to ask us, why did you guys decide to do things this way in particular when it was such a hassle for us in the lab? You can call me out on anything and I'm happy to respond. But maybe some of you are just content with my witticisms and silly sayings.
Yeah, we're also using this to learn from you. Oh, did we have a question?
Sorry, yeah. So someone actually messaged me about a question, and it's more regarding student feedback. So have you guys received some student feedback at all regarding how the performance of anatomy has gone, and kind of just how students maybe have felt at all?
Yeah, we have. I know Becca and Sean can chip in as well. We'll show a little bit about that later on. We actually do have some content that we'd like to share with you guys, because in the middle of each term that we've done, what we ended up doing is we created just a short little survey, 10 minutes. Some of you actually ended up doing it, which is lovely. And we kind of use that to gauge where we're at and what students are needing. So we'll share a little bit more of that information, but we actually did get feedback and we started to gear some of the things towards some of that feedback. It's a little bit difficult to change everything on the fly because, again, we started working on this like back in April of last year. So when the shutdown happened in March, we kind of finished everything off really pivoted really quickly. And we just ended up going, okay, we sort of have an idea of what kind of thing this might look like. And pretty much throughout the majority of the summer, we were setting things up. So it's difficult to quickly change, but it did help us kind of think ahead a little bit more about, okay, if this is what we're getting in the fall term, what about the winter term? And I think even my lab manuals in the fall term, I was able to change like just a week or two before they were released, because I did it in sections and pieces. So the style slightly changes as we go because it was just based on feedback.
Yeah, I think I might chime in as well on that. I think that's a great question, Alex. It's funny, like this slide here, the breakout rooms was one of the biggest tangible things to come from our feedback. So the feedback from the fall term that we received, it's really tough teaching online. In a lab, you can have several different conversations going at once, and they might be going in a million directions. On Microsoft Teams, it's quite difficult. You can really only have one person talking. So we, again, needed to figure out a creative way to facilitate those different discussions and directions and kind of paths. So we needed to shrink the groups. So that was one of the things that we did to hopefully, again, facilitate some more peer-to-peer learning. And that came directly from the feedback that we got in the fall.
Awesome, thank you. And does anybody else have any other questions? Oh, I've got one actually, someone who just messaged me. So this person asked me, what was your greatest motivation to go forward with such changes in the online environment? What kind of motivated you guys to do this?
I can start us off here. This might be very biased, but I think our passion for both anatomy as well as student success was the biggest motivator. As individuals who've taught anatomy, we understand the value and the wonders that this discipline provides, and we wanted to make sure that the students that are going through this virtual world basically don't miss out. I think that it's, especially with anatomy is a very universal and universal discipline that becomes a bridge for so many other fields of interest that I think it was very crucial on our end to take this responsibility very seriously and help our students succeed in whatever capacity we have. So whether it be, again, providing interactive tools or just providing activities in different formats and providing a team that can relate to student experiences, whether it's within the scope of the anatomy education or beyond, such as the troubles of learning online. So I think that, both our strong interest in anatomy and our strong interest in ensuring our students succeed was one of the biggest motivators throughout this really, really interesting time.
I think that kind of sums it up pretty well. What else can I add? These guys don't need to hear from us anymore. So if no one else has any particular questions about why we did what we did or how come, I suppose we can stop talking now. So thank you to Sean, Becca, Yasmin. I will once again shut up and let Alex and Vinita continue to introduce our next speaker.
Sorry, unmute myself. So hello everyone. Next we have speakers who either are currently Brock student, alumni, who have previously volunteered as an anatomy volunteer. They will give some of their experiences and feedback of what it was like to be an anatomy volunteer. First we have Jenna Greco, who is a naturopathic doctor candidate and who is an anatomy volunteer. So please welcome her.
Hi there, everyone. Again, my name is Jenna Greco. I am a recent graduate of Brock University in the medical sciences program. I had the incredible opportunity of volunteering in Brock University's cadaver lab in my third year of my undergraduate degree after taking an anatomy course under Dr. McPherson. I can't even begin to describe everything that I took from that experience. First of all, it was a great refresher of my knowledge on a weekly basis, getting to go into the lab and experiment with the different models that they have and just be in the midst of these cadavers. It was honestly an incredible learning experience, especially after having previously taken the course the year prior. That experience also really solidified my passion for educating others. It gave me a great appreciation for the work that goes on behind the scenes that we really aren't aware of as students. I know every week almost I would see Dr. McPherson pop her head in and ask questions and make sure that students and volunteers were maximizing their learning resources and just adjusting well to all of the different opportunities and resources that were implemented into the anatomy program itself. So getting to just be a part of that opportunity and that anatomy experience was very special. The subsequent year, I took on more of a leadership role and opportunity, and I became a senior volunteer. So essentially, I oversaw the different volunteers and the positions that I had done the prior year. And again, that was great. I was still in the lab just as much as I had been as a regular volunteer, but this time I was making sure that the volunteers were okay, and if they had any questions or further ideas to implement into the program to just further its success, that they were warranted and that they felt if there were any questions or concerns, that I was an ally and someone that they could kind of reach out to. The last thing that I really, really appreciated and kind of took from this experience was the anatomage table. So when I first started volunteering in the lab, the anatomage table, it was its first year at Brock for students to kind of use. And what an incredible learning resource that is. When I took on the more of a leadership opportunity and became a senior volunteer in the lab, I was able to go in and kind of experiment with this table, and you could just delve back all of the layers of the human body, different musculoskeletal systems and layers. And it was incredible to get to, on paper, learn and study all of the material and content. And then another to get to take it back and really go into depth of what it is you're learning and what it is you're studying. Being a part of the anatomy team, I've never seen a team more dedicated to ensuring the success of their students. It is amazing. And I was so honored and excited to get to be a part of that. And even having been a recent graduate, I still get to talk to Dr. McPherson when I have questions. These professors, they want to build that bond with you. And I've never experienced that aside from this team. So I thank you all so much for having me here today. It's been an awesome opportunity for me, and you really have built a family within the Brock community. And I thank you for letting me be a part of it and getting to speak about everything that I took from it. And I guarantee you I will implement everything that I've learned under your mentorship with me in the field that I'm pursuing. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenna. Great speech. I think a lot of volunteers and students can relate to your experience that you've shared with us. Next, we have Aurora Battis. Sorry if I pronounced her last name wrong incorrectly. And she is also an alumni for anatomy volunteering, and she's currently a candidate for Master of Science in Kinesiology. So please welcome her, and she'll share her experiences as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Aurora and I'm a first-year master's student here at Brock under the supervision of Dr. Baudet, and I'm also one of the musculoskeletal anatomy TAs. So I'm here to talk to you today a bit about my experience with anatomy. So my journey starts when I was in second year at Brock. I was being taught by Dr. McPherson, and at that point in my degree I was feeling really swallowed up by the whole undergraduate experience so far, just feeling like I hadn't really found my niche yet. So when we started learning about anatomy, the content was really exciting and the labs were really cool. Having the opportunity to be in the cadaver labs was amazing, probably one of the coolest things I got to do in my undergrad. And I was having continuously positive experiences with my TAs, with my volunteers, with Dr. McPherson. So when she put forward the opportunity to become an anatomy volunteer the following year, I jumped on it. So I became a volunteer for systems anatomy in my third year, and then I went on to be a senior volunteer again for systems anatomy in my fourth year. So during these 2 years as a volunteer, I learned a lot about myself, I learned a lot about other people, and I got to learn even more about anatomy, which was great. So I definitely learned better time management skills, and volunteering allowed me to step into more of a mentorship role, which was something that I found out that I really liked, so that was great. As well, we got to really employ knowledge translation and mobilization skills, which is something that I took with me through the rest of my undergraduate degree as well as into graduate school. I had my first real professional networking opportunity. Dr. McPherson had put forth the opportunity to attend a conference at McMaster, which was hosted by Dr. Bruce Wainman, and he was remarkable at the conference, and I'm sure he was just as amazing here today. And at that conference, I got the chance to get my feet wet in different avenues of anatomy and hear a little bit about what's going on in current research, and that really piqued my interest. So this, paired with being able to interact with my peers, with my TAs, and with Dr. Dragon in the lab every single week as a volunteer, it really allowed me to explore my appreciation and deepen my understanding of anatomy. So ultimately, I think all of these things led me down the path that I'm on today, which is into graduate school in the field. I am so thankful for the journey that anatomy has taken me on so far, and these skills that I learned as a volunteer really took me through the rest of my undergraduate degree, and they're skills that I'm even taking into graduate school, and I definitely feel that I'm a better TA for having volunteered in anatomy in my undergrad. So I definitely am very thankful for this whole journey, and I'm really thankful that we have a really strong and great anatomy team here at Brock.
Awesome. Thank you, Aurora. Your experience of, I'm sure that the experience that you felt of not knowing what to do forward after undergraduate degree can be relatable to a lot of students as well. So thank you for sharing that experience. Next, we have Megan Dennis, who is currently a student in kinesiology, and she's also a frontline volunteer right now. She will give us some experiences and feedback of how anatomy volunteering experience she's been gaining this year. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Megan Dennis, and I'm here to talk about my experiences as a current volunteer in the Brock Anatomy Lab. I am currently in my third semester of volunteering in the musculoskeletal portion of the lab, and I've absolutely loved my experiences so far. My first semester I spent in the lab was actually as a student myself when I took introductory musculoskeletal anatomy, and the experience was incredible. I had never been in a lab like that before, and it was so amazing to get that hands-on education that perfectly reinforced the course concepts we were learning, and it really deepened my interest in learning about human anatomy. After I finished my semester as a student in the lab, I found out that I had the opportunity to apply to volunteer in the lab, and I absolutely jumped at it. When I found out that I had a placement in a lab, I was ecstatic. The first semester that I volunteered in the lab was actually prior to COVID-19, so we were able to work with the students in person, actually setting up specimens and models, working in the labs one-on-one with the students, as well as giving bench talks to the groups as a whole, teaching them new material, answering any questions that they have, being creative about finding new ways for the students to look at problems they might be having. It was hands down the best experience I've had so far in my university career at Brock. I really enjoyed working with the students, and as much as we were teaching them new concepts and helping them understand their course material, it actually also really helped to reinforce my own understanding of musculoskeletal anatomy, and it was a really amazing way for me to refresh my knowledge on a weekly basis. Every semester I was getting to almost retake musculoskeletal anatomy in a way that really is solidifying the information in my head. Once COVID-19 hit, obviously things got a little bit different. We've moved into a completely online setting, working with the students over Microsoft Teams. Luckily, we have a lot of really cool resources to be able to teach these concepts in a virtual setting, a lot of different ways to show the students these structures within the human body, but just in a virtual kind of way. We still get to meet with the students weekly. We still get to help teach them these new concepts, answer any questions that they have. And there's even been some new opportunities for the students now that we're looking at more ways to interact with the students. Now, us frontline volunteers have the opportunity to make things like Kahoot quizzes to interact with the students through. We make them a lot of offline activities, which are just additional ways for them to study the material and really look at it from a different way. There's a lot of really cool things we're doing with the students now to ensure that the education is still at that maximum level, and we're getting a lot of really positive feedback from the students. In addition to the interaction with the students and the education that we're getting, there's also a lot of really cool opportunities that come with being a volunteer in the lab. There's a lot of great networking opportunities, both with professors as well as the graduate students that are interacting with the program in the lab. which can open a lot of doors for undergraduate students like me, a lot of potential research opportunities, even moving up to be a senior volunteer in the program, and just getting to know people and hearing about what career paths they're on to kind of give you some inspiration for where you're going. All around, it's been an amazing experience, and I'm so glad that I did it.
Thank you, Megan, for sharing your experience as well, and sharing all the things you gained from learning from being the frontline volunteer. And we're also thankful for all the frontline volunteers this year for helping out this program. And now we're going to open the floor for any questions anybody may have. Please raise your hand and we'll see who has questions, and we'll bring that up. Thank you. Okay, so I did get a question. If any one of the frontline volunteers or any of these speakers would answer it. Basically, what are some of the things you've learned as a volunteer during this year being COVID, and what the challenges you've faced? So what are some of the things you've learned and takeaways you've taken from this experience?
So I can touch on that a little bit. Unfortunately, I've been out of this system for a little shy of a year, as I recently graduated. So I can't quite touch on the impact of COVID while volunteering, but I can talk about what I took away from the program itself and being a volunteer within the anatomy sector. I would say I took away largely how to effectively communicate with varying types of learners. You know, in the anatomy lab, you have quite a few students who are kind of under your wing, and you want to make sure that they're really grasping the concepts being taught to them in class. And I think someone touched on it earlier. There are a lot of different learners. Some are visual, some are auditory. And so I really took away the importance of when putting forth an idea and explaining a concept, especially a difficult one that students are learning for the first time, you really want to make sure that you have different explanatory concepts and ways to kind of put forth that idea. I know in one lab in particular, we were learning about the circulation of blood and oxygen within the body. And so the one volunteer that I was under used a string, blue and red string, to kind of show those visual learners. But I had some other students in the class who were still struggling with that concept. And so on the board, I was able to put out a diagram and take it step by step for students who really needed a hard copy in order to understand and grasp that information. And I feel as though going into an educational role, it allowed me to appreciate the role that professors have in implementing all of these various active learning strategies in order for their students to really gain all of the knowledge that they're putting forth. So I hope that answers a little bit about the question. Again, I can't really speak to the impact of COVID, but that is definitely what I took away when I was in the program itself.
Excellent. Thanks, Jenna. Is there any other questions the attendees may have? Please raise your hand and we will unmute you to ask the questions. Okay, we do have a second question, if any one of the speakers could answer. What kind of impacts you think you may have had on the students with your volunteer experience as in the lab. Do you have any examples perhaps to share?
I can speak to this one as well. I know the two prior videos were taken beforehand, so I'm not sure if they're in this chat and able to speak about their experiences. I like to think that every week I went in there and I made a difference with some of the students that I encountered. That might be, achieving pretty high, but I remember what it felt like being a student, especially being a first and second year student. You're overwhelmed. University is difficult to adjust to. And so while I was there as a learning resource to kind of help build on their prior knowledge and their educational experience, I also wanted to be a support system in the lab. And so I would share with students what worked for me and what I did in order to achieve success in the program a year prior. And I think having a support system, especially in university, is huge. There was one student in particular who I had shared my email with because in our labs, he just seemed a little bit overwhelmed and stressed. And more importantly, he was having a hard time planning for the future and asking himself, okay, am I in the right field? Is this really what I want to do? And we would communicate over email about how he was doing, how he was coping. And I would see him in the hallways in the years afterwards. And he would tell me, what a difference it was having someone in his corner and having someone that he could communicate with who had gone through similar experiences and seeing where that individual is now and what they learned and took away from their experience that they could also implement in their lives to help them kind of get through some challenging and difficult times. So I think while my main priority was to really educate students in that experience, I also wanted to be there as an ally to help them succeed, not only in the classroom, but also in the field of medicine and healthcare itself.
Awesome, Jenna. Thanks for sharing. I think we're going to move on to the next agenda. So I'll let Dr. Dragon take over.